Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the weeds on something complex, the way we process grief, specifically through the lens of adult attachment. We're looking at a particular state called failed mourning unresolved attachment.
That's right. And we're not just talking about basic attachment styles you might read about online. The research we've dug into uses a pretty sophisticated tool, the Adult Attachment Projective, or AAP.
Okay.
And it gives us this incredible map, really, showing why some people get profoundly stuck in grief and trauma. Our goal today is to lay out that map and talk about the evidence-based ways, including therapeutic writing, to find resolution, to reach what's called earned security.
Right, so let's start with that tool, the AAP. You said it's different from the usual questionnaires. How so?
Yeah, completely different. Self-reports, they rely on what you consciously think or believe about yourself. The AAP gets underneath that. It assesses the unconscious ways we represent attachment, loss, even trauma in our minds.
How does it do that?
Well, it's projective. People are shown these evocative line drawings, 8 of them, and they're asked to tell a story about what's happening.
What kind of drawings?
They're specifically designed to stir things up, to activate the attachment system. Scenes showing maybe loneliness, separation, relationship tension, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And how someone constructs that story, the narrative they create spontaneously, reveals how well they can organize or fail to organize that emotional distress. It bypasses the usual defenses.
Interesting. So from those stories, the research identifies the main attachment styles we often hear about. Secure, avoidant, anxious.
Exactly. Though in the AAP model, they're termed secure, dismissing, which is like avoidant and preoccupied, which lines up with anxious.
Yeah.
And the key thing is, these 3 are considered organized styles.
Even the insecure ones, dismissing and preoccupied. Why organized?
Because fundamentally, even if the strategy isn't, let's say, ideal, individuals with these styles can still contain or modulate their distress. There's a coherence there.
Right.
So someone dismissing might minimize feelings, push them away. It's a defense, maybe flawed long-term, but the system holds. Someone preoccupied might hyper-focus on the distress, get really caught up in it, but they can still tell a coherent, if maybe anxious, story about it.
Okay, so the system is working even if it's stressed or using less than perfect coping mechanisms.
Precisely. It's functional, you
Yeah.
could say. But then we get to the 4th classification, which is where things really break down. Unresolved, sometimes called disorganized, attachment.
And this is where the failure happens.
Yes. This is defined by a fundamental failure in the ability to regulate emotion when the attachment system gets triggered. The research points to a core concept here, the presence of unresolved, segregated systems.
Segregated systems. That sounds technical. What does that mean in practice? Like, if the organized styles are different apps running on a stable OS,
Right.
what's unresolved?
That's a good analogy. Unresolved is like the operating system itself is fractured. Traumatic experiences, think significant loss, abuse, neglect, are just too overwhelming to be integrated into the person's main life story.
So the mind walls them off.
Exactly. It isolates them, cognitively disconnects them. But the wall isn't perfect. When something triggers the attachment system,
Right.
maybe a relationship conflict, a memory, one of those AAP drawings, these walled-off memories, these segregated systems, suddenly intrude.
Oh, okay.
And that leads to these telltale signs: confusion, disorientation, really noticeable lapses in reasoning in the narrative, a sense of being overwhelmed. The person can't maintain a coherent story because they're essentially flipping between their rational adult self and this terrified, unprocessed trauma state.
That idea of flipping between states really captures it. It explains why people might feel like they have these separate parts of themselves that don't connect.
It's often the lived reality of disorganization.
Yeah.
Very confusing, very distressing.
So within this broader unresolved category, the research highlights this specific type, failed mourning, or FM. What makes failed mourning distinct?
Failed mourning is about incomplete pathological mourning. It's not just general confusion. It's specifically marked by the active deactivation of the painful feelings related to trauma or loss.
Active deactivation, so pushing feelings down.
More than just pushing down, it's like building what the research calls an impermeable shell of normalcy, a very rigid defense designed to block conscious access to the pain, the grief, the vulnerability. Think of it as a prolonged, enforced absence of conscious grieving.
Wow, that sounds exhausting. Maintaining that shell must take incredible energy.
It does. And what's really crucial, and what the research strongly links to this state, is shame. Deep, debilitating shame.
Shame.
Yes. The studies show that individuals classified as unresolved, particularly with FM features, experience the highest intensity of debilitating shame, often more so than other trauma groups. That shell, that deactivation, it's built primarily to keep that unbearable shame contained and out of conscious awareness.
And we're not just talking about feeling bad about something you did, but like a core sense of being flawed.
Exactly. It's what's called unremedied shame.
Well,
It often stems from early experiences where a child's feelings or needs were ignored, dismissed, maybe even punished,
right.
and it gets internalized. The narrative often includes this implicit or sometimes explicit self-blame. Must have been my fault. I deserved what happened. This belief becomes the glue holding that impermeable shell together.
Because if you believe you deserve the bad treatment, you can't really grieve for the part of you that suffered.
Precisely. You can't access compassion for that younger self.
Yeah.
It locks you out of the grieving process. And this directly connects to symptoms we see in, say, prolonged grief disorder. The emotional numbness, the active avoidance of reminders, the feeling that the loss isn't real. They successfully block the grief, but also block the path to healing.
It's a profound block. So given this impermeable shell built on shame and segregation,
Uh,
how does therapy even begin to address it? What's the path towards resolution, towards this earned, secure attachment?
Well, the goal is basically psychological restructuring, moving from that disorganized, fragmented state to a coherent, integrated narrative. It absolutely has to be a phased approach.
Okay, phase one.
Phase I is all about stabilization and, crucially, eliciting effect safely. Remember, these individuals often have histories where their feelings were silenced or invalidated. So the first step, the non-negotiable foundation, is establishing the therapeutic relationship itself as a secure base.
Building trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the research suggests something interesting here. Using the assessment results themselves can be really powerful early on
How so?
through what's called therapeutic assessment, or TA. This involves carefully sharing the AAP findings with the client, explaining, look, here's where the narrative breaks down, here's evidence of these segregated systems.
Why is that helpful?
It's incredibly validating. It takes this confusing internal experience and makes it understandable. It externalizes it. The client realizes, oh, I'm not just broken or crazy. There's a reason I feel this way. My system is disorganized because of what happened. It makes the unspoken spoken. And that often provides the motivation needed to actually engage in the difficult work ahead.
That makes sense. It gives them a framework, but okay, they understand it intellectually. How do they start to actually feel the difficult emotions, like that intense shame, without the shell just slamming shut again?
That's where mentalizing comes in. A big focus of early therapy is restoring or building the capacity to mentalize, which is basically the ability to think about thinking and feeling, to understand your own mental state and the mental states of others.
So being able to observe the feeling without being completely overwhelmed by it.
Exactly. Learning to hold that shame, that grief, that fear with some curiosity and compassion, rather than either being flooded by it or needing to immediately shut it down, developing that observer self.
Okay, so we have a secure base, some initial validation, and growing capacity to tolerate difficult feelings. What's phase two? Getting into the trauma itself.
Yes, phase two involves processing the trauma and integrating the loss. Now we need techniques that can actually access and rework those segregated memories that are causing the disorganization.
What kind of techniques are effective here?
The research points strongly towards modalities that address trauma, where it's often held not just in thoughts, but in the body and the nervous system. Attachment-focused EMDR, AF-EMDR, is highlighted specifically.
EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing? How is the attachment-focused version different?
It specifically uses the bilateral stimulation, the eye movements or tapping or sounds, to target and reprocess those early attachment injuries and relational traumas. The goal is to neutralize the intense emotional charge of those segregated memories.
So they stop being like hidden landmines going off.
Right. It helps the brain make new connections, integrating the traumatic memory into the broader life narrative instead of keeping it walled off. It facilitates neurological reorganization, essentially.
And it's not just EMDR, right? You mentioned the body.
Absolutely. Effective treatment usually needs to be integrative, combining top-down cognitive approaches, like CBT, which work with thoughts and beliefs, with bottom-up somatic therapies.
Like sensory motor psychotherapy?
Exactly. Things like sensory psychotherapy or somatic experiencing directly address the physiological states, the fight, flight, freeze responses that get locked in the body with trauma. You can't fully achieve cognitive integration if the body is still living in a state of constant threat.
So it's working on multiple levels simultaneously.
Yes, and it's also about balancing loss-focused work, directly engaging with the grief and trauma, maybe through techniques like imaginal revisiting with restoration-focused work, which is about rebuilding a life, re-engaging with activities, finding meaning again. You need both.
This sounds intensive, but it makes sense that it needs to be multifaceted. Now, one specific technique mentioned in the research sounds particularly powerful, almost like a self-therapy tool. The therapeutic letter of integrative mourning. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, this is fascinating. It's essentially a structured exercise in self-reparenting. It's designed to help the person develop the internal regulation skills they likely didn't receive externally during critical periods.
How does it work?
The adult self intentionally writes a letter to their younger self, specifically targeting the age of imprint, that period where the significant attachment failures or traumas occurred.
So the adult consciously steps into the role of the compassionate, protective figure that was missing back then.
Precisely. And the key is approaching that vulnerable, segregated younger self from the resourceful, organized adult perspective. This structure helps prevent the person from just getting flooded by the old pain, which is what happens with spontaneous intrusions in unresolved states.
They're approaching the trauma intentionally with resources.
Correct. They are creating a safe internal space to meet that part of themselves.
What needs to be in that letter? What makes it therapeutic, especially for tackling that deep, unremedied shame we talked about?
The research outlines a clear protocol. The tone must be one of unwavering compassion, kindness, validation, creating a sense of sanctuary for the child's pain, acknowledging how hard it was. But the absolute core, the non-negotiable element that directly addresses the shame.
Yes.
The letter must contain the explicit affirmation, "It was not your fault."
Wow. Just saying that directly?
Directly, clearly, unequivocally, delivered from the competent adult self to the suffering child self. This statement is the corrective emotional experience. It directly refutes the internalized self-blame that fuels the shame and keeps the person stuck.
It bypasses all the old defenses and justifications.
It aims to. It's the antidote. By offering this validation, plus adult wisdom and perspective, you couldn't have known. You deserved protection. The letter helps build that bridge between the traumatized child state and the resilient adult state. That connection is the definition of narrative coherence.
Integrating the wound into the larger story.
Exactly. Turning it from an open wound into an integrated scar.
Yeah.
And there's one more step often recommended.
Oh.
After the adult writes to the child, the final step is often to write a follow-up letter from the inner child back to the adult self.
Why is that important?
It helps ensure any remaining unheard feelings, fears, or needs from that younger self are fully voiced and acknowledged by the adult self. It maximizes the sense of internal dialogue and resolution. It helps fully empty out those segregated pockets of experience. And this aligns with broader research on expressive writing, especially from a slightly distanced perspective, being effective for processing grief.
So it's a really structured way to foster that internal, secure attachment relationship.
That's the goal.
This is incredibly insightful. It paints a picture where resolving something as deep as failed mourning isn't just about talking, but about fundamentally restructuring the internal architecture, moving from that incoherence and dysregulation to a unified, coherent sense of self and life story.
It really underscores that healing requires this kind of precise, phased, and deeply relational approach, whether that relationship is with a therapist or, as in the letter writing, consciously cultivated within oneself, becoming the secure base you needed.
It shifts the focus, doesn't it? The research seems to suggest the crucial question isn't just what happened to you, but how you can actively rewrite the emotional narrative now, using these tools and understanding.
Precisely. Understanding the why behind being stuck gives you the how to get unstuck.
If this conversation has resonated, if you recognize some of these patterns of feeling stuck in grief or dealing with that deep sense of shame or maybe feeling internally fragmented, know that specialized help is available.
Yes, and organizations like Edward Jenny and Associates really focus on this kind of deep work. They offer both psychotherapy and something called collaborative assessment for individuals and couples, which is designed specifically to get to the root of these kinds of complex, deep-seated issues more efficiently.
Using integrated assessments grounded in the kind of science we've been discussing today.
Exactly. The aim is to provide that crucial insight needed to understand yourself more deeply and, ultimately, to move forward towards healing and that state of earned security. They offer free consultations, and services are available both in person in West Grove, Pennsylvania, and online throughout Pennsylvania. It could be a really valuable next step